The encounter the wind howled across the vast plains, whipping up dust and scattering the last of the autumn leaves. Clara's boots crunched on the dry earth as she walked, the faintest trace of snow dusting the tips of the nearby pines. Her breath formed mist in the cold air, as she moved silently, wrapped in the solitude of the wilderness she called home. Clara had chosen this life, a quiet existence in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, far from the encroaching settlements of the East. The world was changing, and she wasn't sure if she could keep up with it. There was something about the rugged, untamed land that spoke to her soul, the isolation a balm to a heart worn thin by loss. Her father had been a miner, and her mother had died when Clara was young. With no siblings, she had inherited their modest cabin and, in a way, their dreams of finding peace in the mountains. She'd grown used to the solitude, but that didn't mean she wasn't occasionally startled by the land's wildness. That morning, as she crossed the snow-dusted plains, a strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck, a feeling of being watched. It was the kind of instinct that couldn't be ignored. Clara paused, scanning the land before her. There, just beyond a cluster of boulders, she spotted him. A man, a warrior. His body was sprawled across the rocks, eyes closed, but Clara could see the telltale signs of a recent battle, blood smeared across his chest and limbs. His clothing torn, his face grim. Her heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. She had heard rumors of the Cheyenne, of their war with settlers and the way they moved through the land like shadows, fierce and proud. But this wasn't the time for fear. Clara was a healer, and her first instinct was to help. She knew the danger of aiding someone from a different tribe. If he survived, would his people come for her? Would they see her as an enemy for helping him? But she couldn't leave him here, not like this. She approached cautiously, her hand on the hilt of her knife, just in case. His eyes flickered open, and for a moment, there was a spark of recognition. His gaze was sharp, assessing, as though he had expected death, but now, found something else, something unfamiliar. "You are Cheyenne," she said softly, her voice shaking only slightly. "I can help you." The warrior's lips twitched, his breath shallow. He gave a slight nod, but it was clear he didn't have the strength to speak. She didn't wait for more. Clara quickly went to work, gathering herbs from the wildflowers that dotted the landscape. Her fingers steady despite the strange feeling in her chest. She cleaned his wounds with water from the nearby stream, then dressed them as best as she could, all the while watching his expression. He winced with every touch, but never made a sound. Clara's eyes flicked over the warrior's body. He was younger than she had first assumed, perhaps in his mid-20s, with sharp cheekbones and a weathered face. His raven-black hair was matted, with dirt and blood, his skin the rich brown of someone who had lived much of his life outdoors. Despite his injuries, there was a quiet strength about him that tugged at something deep inside her. She wasn't sure why she felt so compelled to help him. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in his eyes, the way his pride seemed to have fallen away in the face of death. Or maybe it was just the sense of isolation she often felt herself. A silent understanding that, no matter the differences between them, they were both alone in this vast wilderness. Hours passed as Clara worked, her hands never tiring, her mind focused on keeping him alive. When she finally stepped back, the warrior's breathing had steadied. He wasn't out of danger, but he had made it through the worst of the night. Clara sat down on a large rock nearby, wiping the sweat from her brow and watching him. He was still too weak to move, but she knew he would wake soon. "Do you have a name?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost tender. The warrior's eyes opened again, and there was a flicker of recognition in them. Slowly, he lifted his head, just enough to look at her. His lips parted, but for a moment, he only stared at her, his eyes unreadable. "Ashka," he rasped, his voice hoarse. Clara nodded. "Ashka, I'm Clara." A long pause followed, during which the silence between them seemed to stretch. Clara could feel the weight of the unspoken words, the questions that hung in the air, the suspicions, the fears. The world outside their small circle was unpredictable and dangerous, especially for someone like him. Ashka shifted slightly, and Clara's hand instinctively went to her knife, though she didn't move to draw it. He must have seen the tension in her, because he managed a faint, crooked smile. It was a strange thing, this warrior, broken but still proud, meeting her gaze with those dark, intense eyes. "Why help me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You are not Cheyenne, not one of us." Clara didn't answer right away. She simply shrugged. "I help where I can." Another silence passed between them, but it was a different kind of silence. The kind that acknowledged something deeper was unfolding between them, something neither of them fully understood. Clara's heartbeat slowed as she watched him, and for the first time, the weight of her decision settled in. She had chosen to help him, and that choice could change everything. Thus the days after Ashka's near-death encounter were a blur of quiet, patient care. Clara had no intention of letting him die. But the weight of what she had done, what she was doing, pressed on her shoulders, like a heavy stone. He wasn't just any injured man. He was a Cheyenne warrior, part of a people who lived by codes she could barely comprehend. And by saving him, she had made herself a part of a story that was far beyond her. The cabin where she lived, tucked away in the foothills of the sacred mountains, was small and humble, with a wood stove that kept the cold at bay, and a single window that framed a view of the peaks. It had once belonged to her father, a miner who had passed away years ago, leaving Clara with little more than his old tools and a legacy of isolation. The simple life she had grown accustomed to was now filled with the rhythms of tending to a wounded man. Ashka, though weak, had a quiet intensity about him that was hard to ignore. As he recovered, Clara found herself drawn to him in a way she hadn't expected. He was a man of few words, his deep, gravelly voice only breaking the silence when absolutely necessary. He seemed to take her help without gratitude, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. He knew she had saved his life, and she knew he would have never accepted help from someone else. Each morning, Clara would prepare a small meal, from what little she had: dried meats, vegetables from her garden, and herbs she gathered from the surrounding woods. Ashka would sit silently by the fire, his eyes constantly scanning the room, the forest outside, the ceiling. Even as his strength returned, he didn't speak of his past or his mission. He only watched, listened, and waited. Clara was becoming more accustomed to his presence, though the unease never fully left her. At first, she had been frightened of him, of what he might do once he regained his strength. But over time, she learned to read the subtle shifts in his expression, the tension in his muscles when something caught his attention. He wasn't like the stories she had heard about the Cheyenne, ferocious warriors, merciless fighters. Ashk was no monster. He was a man with his own burdens. It wasn't until the fourth day that he spoke again, and when he did, it was only after Clara had been silently cleaning the cabin, her hands moving automatically through the motions of her chores. She had grown used to his silences, the way he stared at the fire or at the walls, lost in his thoughts. "What happened to you?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she folded a blanket. Ashka's eyes flickered toward her, but he didn't immediately respond. Instead, he shifted his weight, his ribs aching from the injuries that had left him so vulnerable. It was clear he wasn't used to relying on anyone, and the softness of Clara's voice seemed to unnerve him. "I was on a journey," he said finally, his words slow and deliberate. "A sacred journey." Clara stopped, her hands stilling as she turned to look at him. His gaze met hers, and for the first time, she saw a glimmer of something vulnerable in his eyes, a flash of the man beneath the warrior. "A sacred journey," she echoed. Ashka nodded, his face grim. He didn't elaborate, but Clara could see that this journey, this mission of his, was of great importance. His body was still frail from the wound he had suffered, but the flicker of resolve in his eyes told her that he wasn't someone who gave up easily. "What were you searching for?" Clara asked, curiosity creeping into her voice despite herself. She was a woman who had lived her life mostly in solitude, but there was something about Ashka's quiet presence that drew her in, something that made her want to understand the man beneath the warrior. "A relic," he replied simply, and Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. "A relic of my people. A gift from the spirits." She didn't press further, though her mind raced with questions. A relic? What kind of relic could possibly hold such significance? What did it mean for the Cheyenne, and for Ashka himself? Clara didn't know much about the Cheyenne, except for what she had heard in passing: their nomadic ways, their war with settlers, the land they fought for. But this relic sounded different. She wondered if it was something that could change everything for him, and for his people. Could it be something powerful, like a weapon? Or something more? Ashka, as if sensing her questions, added, "It is not a weapon, it is a symbol. A key, a key." Clara repeated, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "To our people," Ashka said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "To our land. It will unite us, or it will destroy us." The weight of his words lingered in the room, hanging, like an oppressive fog. Clara felt it, this weight that pressed down on her chest, on the very air around them. She had always known there was something larger at play in the world, something beyond her quiet existence in the mountains. But now, As Ashka spoke, the gravity of his mission seemed to connect her life with forces she had never truly understood. But you were wounded, Clara said, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Your journey. It's not over, is it? Ashka's jaw tightened. It is not over. But I fear time is against me. Clara could see the shadows in his eyes, the fear that he might fail in his mission, and yet the quiet resolve that ran deeper than the pain in his body. He was a man driven by something larger than himself, something that consumed him. Even when his body was weak, Clara's mind raced as she thought about her options. She could continue to nurse him back to health, sending him on his way once he was strong enough. But something told her that this mission, this relic, was far too important for her to ignore. There was a thread that tied her to it now, whether she wanted it or not. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I'll help you find it. If you'll let me. Ashka looked at her, his gaze unreadable. It's dangerous, I know, Clara replied, her voice steady. But I've lived in these mountains long enough to know that danger doesn't always come from what we expect. For a moment, Ashka simply studied her, and Clara couldn't read the thoughts behind his dark eyes. Then, he nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. Then we will go together, he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. But be warned, Clara. Once we start this journey, there is no turning back. Clara didn't flinch. She knew what she was signing up for, and though the stakes were higher than anything she had ever known, something deep inside her told her that she had made secrets unveiled. The days passed in a blur as Clara prepared for the journey. The weather turned colder, and the heavy clouds that hung over the mountains seemed to echo the tension between her and Ashka. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to find herself so entangled in the mysteries of the Cheyenne warriors' mission. Yet here she was, packing her supplies for a journey that could change the course of both their lives. Ashka had grown stronger. But he was still recovering. Every day, he spent more time walking around the small cabin, testing his strength. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a panther recovering from injury, still wary but never fully at ease. Despite his silence, Clara had begun to understand the way he carried himself. As a man of duty, someone bound to something greater than himself. She could sense his resolve, but she could also feel the pressure of the secrets he kept. One evening, as the light dimmed in the sky and the first stars began to appear, Clara found herself sitting by the fire, sharpening a knife. Ashka sat across from her, his dark eyes watching the flames, his face impassive. Why don't you tell me more about the relic? Clara asked, her voice steady. What is it really? Ashka's eyes flickered toward her, but he didn't immediately respond. The question hung in the air, as if the very mention of it weighed down on him. Clara had asked before, but Ashka had been vague, speaking only in cryptic phrases. But now, with the journey ahead, she couldn't help herself. She needed to understand. After a long pause, Ashka shifted, his jaw tightening slightly. Then with a soft sigh, he spoke. The relic ... is not just a symbol. It is a key, yes, but not just to unite us as a people. It is said to be the heart of our tribe, a powerful force that has been lost for generations. Our ancestors hid it away when the white man came to our land. They believed it would protect us, but in the wrong hands. It could destroy us. Clara leaned forward, her breath catching. What do you mean, destroy us? Ashka's gaze grew distant, his eyes darkening. The artifact is more than just a relic. It is a spirit, a force bound to our people. If it falls into the wrong hands, into the hands of those who seek power, it could bring devastation. The land, the sky, even the spirits themselves could turn against us. Clara sat back, digesting his words. Her thoughts churned, trying to make sense of what he had just revealed. A powerful artifact, capable of shaping the fate of an entire people. It sounded like something out of a legend, yet Ashka spoke with a conviction that was hard to dismiss. So you believe someone is trying to take it? Clara asked, her voice soft but steady. Someone other than you. Ashka's eyes met hers then, sharp and intense. Yes, my tribe is divided. There are those who seek the relic for their own gain. They believe it will give them the power to defeat our enemies. They are willing to do anything to get it. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She could see now that this mission was not just about finding a lost artifact. It was about survival, not just for Ashka but for his entire people. Do you know who they are? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ashka hesitated, his face hardening. Yes, it is the Black Hawk faction, a group of rebels who believe that violence is the only way to secure the future of the Cheyenne. They would use the relic to conquer the neighboring tribes, and they would stop at nothing to take it. Clara felt her heart race. The Black Hawk faction rebels outlaws were the stuff of whispers and rumors. They had been known to raid settlements and terrorize anyone who stood in their way. They were feared by both settlers and other native tribes, and if they were after the relic, things were much worse than she had first realized. But why hasn't anyone stopped them? Clara asked, her voice full of disbelief. They are powerful, Ashka said, his voice quiet but laced with a deep frustration. They have supporters within the tribe, and they have the strength of numbers. The leaders of our people are divided on how to handle them. Some fear the relic's power and believe it should remain hidden. Others believe that uniting the tribes under one banner is the only way to survive. Clara's mind spun as she tried to comprehend the weight of what Ashka had said. The sacred mountains, the relic, the power it held. It wasn't just about Ashka's mission. It was about the very future of his people. And now, she had been drawn into it. I didn't know, she said quietly, more to herself than to him. I didn't know things were so bad. Ashka's gaze softened, but only slightly. You could never have known. But now you do. And now we must act. The fire crackled between them, its warmth doing little to ease the tension that had settled over the room. Clara felt a knot form in her stomach, a sense of unease creeping in. What had she gotten herself into? What if the danger was far greater than she could handle? Ashka must have seen the hesitation in her eyes because he spoke again, his voice firm, almost comforting. I will not let anything happen to you, Clara. You don't have to come. But if you do, we must go soon. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him. There was a quiet determination in his strength that was undeniable, and for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she trusted him. She trusted that he wouldn't lead her into something she couldn't handle, even though the stakes were higher than she could fathom. She stood slowly, moving toward the window where the fading light of day cast long shadows on the land. The mountains, ever watchful, seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. Clara felt that energy in her bones now, a call that she couldn't ignore. I'll help you, she said, her voice steady. I'm not afraid. Ashka was silent for a moment, his eyes searching her face as if weighing her words. Then, he nodded, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Then we leave at dawn. The next morning, they set out before the sun had fully risen, packing what little they could carry. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as they trekked deeper into the mountains, the weight of Ashka's words echoing in her mind. The relic, the Black Hawk faction, the fate of the Cheyenne, it was all too much to take in. But Clara couldn't turn back now. She had made her choice, and whatever awaited them in the mountains, she would face it by his side. Into the unknown, the mountain air was thin and cold, biting at Clara's cheeks as she trudged beside Ashka through the rugged terrain. The forest had begun to thin out as they ascended higher, the trees sparse and twisted, their gnarled branches clawing toward the sky. The snow had become deeper, the frost biting at the tips of her boots with each step. Clara's breath came in visible clouds, her chest tightening with the altitude. But she kept pace with Ashka, whose movements were still fluid, despite the lingering weakness in his body. His injuries had healed, but the journey had taken its toll on him. And Clara could see the occasional flicker of pain in his eyes. The silence between them was both comfortable and heavy. Clara had never been one for idle chatter, but the weight of the journey pressed on them both. They had left the cabin early that morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, and they hadn't spoken much since. The path was treacherous, winding through the steep ridges and narrow ravines of the sacred mountains. The landscape was harsh, but Ashka moved with a surety that Clara couldn't help but admire. She glanced at him occasionally, noting the quiet intensity in his expression. He was a man on a mission, driven, focused, but there was something in the way he carried himself now that suggested a deeper sense of burden. Clara could see it in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw. He wasn't just searching for a relic, he was searching for redemption, or perhaps for a way to save his people from a fate that felt inevitable. At midday, they stopped to rest near a small creek that wound through a valley. Ashka knelt by the water, washing his hands, and Clara followed suit, taking a moment to drink from the cold stream. She could taste the freshness of the water, the purity of the mountains, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax, to forget the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. When she looked up, Ashka was watching her, his dark eyes shadowed by the trees. There was a strange intensity in his gaze, something almost unreadable. Why are you doing this? He asked suddenly, his voice quiet but cutting through the stillness of the mountains. Clara paused, her heart skipping a beat. She had known he would ask, but she hadn't prepared herself for the question. She thought about it for a moment, her fingers stilling around the canteen in her hands. "I don't know," she said slowly, meeting his eyes. "I guess. I didn't think I could just turn my back once I knew. I could have stayed at the cabin. I could have stayed safe. But there's something about this, ... Her voice trailed off as she searched for the right words. "It's bigger than me, than us. The land, the people, the choices we make. I think I want to be part of something that matters, even if I don't fully understand it." Ash said nothing for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. His face remained neutral. But there was something in his eyes that softened just slightly. "You could have gone back," he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. "It would have been safer." "I know." Clara smiled wryly, though the unease in her stomach hadn't faded. "But where's the fun in that?" A flicker of a smile appeared on Ashka's lips, and for a moment, Clara saw something in him that she hadn't expected. Warmth, humanity. It was brief, gone almost as soon as it had appeared, but it was enough to remind her that Ashka wasn't just a warrior, a man on a mission. He was a person, just like her, caught between the forces of fate and his own choices. After a short rest, they resumed their journey, climbing higher into the mountains, where the air grew colder and thinner. The path grew more treacherous as they ascended, the snow covering the ground in thick layers, hiding jagged rocks and sharp ridges. Ashka led the way, his movements sure and practiced, though Clara could see the toll the climb was taking on him. He stopped every so often to catch his breath, his hand gripping a nearby rock for support. Clara's worry deepened, but she said nothing, knowing he would not welcome her concern. It was late in the afternoon when they reached a small cave, tucked into the side of a mountain ridge. Ashka paused at the entrance, his eyes scanning the dark recesses of the cave, his muscles tense. Clara's instincts kicked in immediately. There was something off about the place. A feeling she couldn't shake. "We should rest here for the night," Ashka said, his voice low and cautious. Clara nodded, her gaze flicking to the cave entrance. It was dark inside, the shadows deep and heavy. She hesitated for a moment before following him in. As soon as she entered, the temperature seemed to drop even further. The cave was small, the walls uneven and jagged, but it would offer them shelter from the cold night ahead. Ashka started a fire, using dry wood from the surrounding area, and the crackling flames filled the space with warmth. As they settled in, Clara's mind wandered back to the relic. She couldn't stop thinking about it, the way Ashka had spoken of its power, the way he'd described it as something that could either save or destroy. She didn't fully understand it, but she knew it was important, more important than either of them had realized. And if the Black Hawk faction was after it, things were about to get even more dangerous. They ate a simple meal, and the silence between them stretched again. Clara's thoughts were a whirl of questions about Ashka, about the relic, about what was waiting for them at the end of this journey. But when she glanced at him, sitting across the fire, his face illuminated by the flames, she knew one thing for sure: they were in this together. "Tomorrow," Ashka said suddenly, breaking the silence, "we will reach the peak. The relic is hidden there, in the heart of the mountains. But I don't know what we will find." Clara looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. This was the final stretch. The unknown loomed ahead, filled with promise and danger. And they were walking straight into it. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Ashka met her gaze, his eyes dark and serious. "Then we go tomorrow, and we don't look back." The fire crackled in the darkness, and the wind howled outside the cave, but Clara felt a quiet resolve settle within her. The journey had taken them far from everything familiar, and tomorrow, they would stand at the edge of something even greater. Whatever awaited them in the heart of the mountains, she would face it by his side. The heart of the mountains. The dawn broke slowly over the peaks, the pale light spilling across the snow-covered ridges. Clara had barely slept. The cold, the tension, and the weight of what lay ahead had kept her tossing and turning, her thoughts racing. Ashka hadn't spoken much that night, his eyes distant, lost in the shadows of his own mind. She didn't ask him what he was thinking, he wouldn't answer anyway. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was about to unfold, something that would change everything. By the time they left the cave, the sun was climbing higher, casting long shadows across the icy landscape. Clara's breath misted in front of her as she trudged beside Ashka, the chill air biting at her skin. They moved in silence, the path growing steeper as they neared the heart of the mountains. The landscape was barren here, sharp cliffs, jagged rocks, and stretches of icy flats. The mountains loomed like ancient sentinels, their towering peaks obscured by the swirling clouds that seemed to gather with increasing intensity. Ashka led the way, his gaze never leaving the path ahead, but Clara could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. His movements were more cautious now, every step measured, as if he were listening for something. Clara didn't speak, she didn't need to. She had learned enough about Ashka to know when he was focused on something more than just the present. He was waiting for something. After hours of climbing, they finally reached a narrow pass between two towering cliffs. It was here, Ashka had said, where the relic was hidden, a place sacred to his people. A place that even the Black Hawk faction wouldn't dare desecrate. But Clara could feel it, the energy in the air, thick and heavy, as if the land itself was watching them, waiting. Ashka stopped suddenly, his posture rigid, his gaze scanning the cliffs around them. Clara could see the muscles in his neck tense, the faintest tremor running through his body. She instinctively reached for the knife at her side, her senses sharpening. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something here," Ashka replied, his voice low. "Something ancient. The spirits of the mountains don't take kindly to intruders." Clara swallowed, her throat tight. She had no idea what he meant by that, but she could feel the weight of his words. The air had thickened. The wind seemed to howl more loudly now, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed in the peaks. It was as if the mountains themselves were alive, stirring in warning. Ashka stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the narrow crevice between the cliffs. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice urgent. "The relic is hidden in the temple beyond, but getting there won't be easy." Clara followed him, her heart pounding. The path narrowed even further as they stepped deeper into the pass, and soon, they found themselves standing before an ancient stone structure, half buried in snow and rock, worn by time and neglect. The stones were covered in symbols, etched deep into the surface, their meaning lost to all but a few. Ashka ran his fingers over the carvings, his face unreadable. "This is it," he murmured, almost to himself. "The temple of my ancestors." Clara stepped closer, studying the stonework. The carvings seemed to shift in the light, the shapes morphing into figures, warriors, animals, the sky and the earth. It was beautiful in its way, but there was something unnerving about it, as if the stones themselves held secrets, ancient and powerful. The air felt thicker here, charged with something unknown. Ashka didn't hesitate. He reached out and pressed his palm against a large stone slab, hidden behind a thick layer of snow and ice. At once, the stone seemed to shift, groaning as it moved slowly inward, revealing a dark passageway that descended into the heart of the mountain. "Come," Ashka said, his voice steady. "It's time." Clara hesitated for just a moment, her mind racing. There was no going back now. They were standing on the precipice of something that could change everything, something that could either save or destroy. Ashka's people. She could feel the pull of it, deep in her bones, the weight of the decision pressing on her. But she had come this far, and there was no turning back. She followed him into the passage, the air growing colder still as they descended into the dark. The walls were rough-hewn stone, damp and cold to the touch. They moved in silence, their footsteps echoing in the narrow tunnel. The further they went, the darker it became, until they were relying on the flickering light from their torches to guide them. Clara's mind swam with questions, but she kept them to herself. Whatever this place was, it was not for her to understand, not yet. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached a vast chamber. The space opened up in front of them, the ceiling stretching high above, lost in shadow. The walls were covered in more carvings, figures of gods, warriors, animals, and strange symbols that Clara didn't recognize. But what drew her attention immediately was the altar at the center of the room. It was made of smooth, black stone, and at its base lay a small, intricately carved box. Ashka stepped forward, his eyes locked on the box. His hand trembled as he reached for it, and Clara could see the reverence in his movements, as if he were touching something sacred, something far beyond anything she could comprehend. "This is it," he said, his voice low. The relic. Clara stood still, her heart racing. The box was beautiful, but there was something about it, something that unsettled her. It seemed to pulse with an energy all its own, as though it were alive. Ashka carefully lifted it, cradling it in his hands, like a fragile treasure. But as soon as his fingers made contact with the box, a low rumble echoed through the chamber. Clara froze, her blood running cold. The walls seemed to tremble, the ground beneath her feet shifting. Ashka's eyes widened in alarm, and he stepped back, clutching the relic tighter. "It's too late," he whispered. "We've disturbed something." Before Clara could react, a shadow moved across the room. Figures' dark shapes emerged from the darkness, their forms shifting and indistinct. Ashka's grip on the relic tightened, but he stepped back, positioning himself between Clara and the oncoming figures. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice grim. The figures drew closer, and Clara could now make out their faces, men-women, their eyes hollow and dark, their bodies twisted and unnatural. They were not alive, but not entirely dead, either spirits of the mountain, perhaps, bound to protect the relic. Their eyes locked onto Ashka, then to the relic in his hands. The air grew cold, and Clara's breath froze in the air. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the power emanating from the relic. It was undeniable now. The relic wasn't just a symbol, it was a force, a being, something older than anything Clara had ever known. "Ashka," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "What are they?" He didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the spirits as they closed in. "We have to go," he said, his voice tight. "Now." The spirits hovered in the air before them, their eyes like blackened pits, gazing into Clara's soul. Their bodies flickered in and out of reality, as if they were made of smoke and shadow. The temperature dropped even further, a chill that numbed her very bones. Clara's heart raced in her chest, every instinct screaming at her to run. But she couldn't. Not with Ashka standing there, holding the relic that had summoned these beings, whatever they were. Ashka's hand tightened around the box, and Clara noticed the veins on his neck stand out, his jaw clenched in concentration. He stood like a stone statue, his back straight, his presence imposing. The spirits did not seem to move, but their energy filled the room, making the air feel thick and oppressive, as if it were choking the life out of everything around them. "Ashka," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible over the heavy silence. "What do they want?" He didn't answer immediately, his focus entirely on the spirits. For a moment, she thought he hadn't heard her, but then, his voice came low and strained. "They are the guardians of the relic," he said. "They were bound to protect it, to keep it hidden." Clara's mind raced. The guardians. Ashka had spoken of the relic's power, but she hadn't understood the full extent of it. These beings, these spirits, they were not just protectors, they were prisoners, bound to the relic for eternity. One of the spirits, a woman with hollow eyes and skin that seemed to flake away like ash, stepped forward. Her voice was a whisper, like the rustling of dry leaves, but it pierced the silence nonetheless. "Why have you come?" she asked, her voice chilling. "The relic is not yours to claim." Clara's blood ran cold as the spirit's gaze settled on her. She took a step back, instinctively moving closer to Ashka. The spirit's eyes locked onto hers, a sense of recognition passing between them, though Clara couldn't explain why. There was something unsettling about the way the spirit regarded her, as if she were an intruder in a place that was never meant for her. Ashka's voice was firm, but there was a tremor in it that Clara hadn't heard before. "We did not come to claim the relic for ourselves," he said, his words heavy with the weight of truth. "It belongs to my people. We need it to stop a greater threat." The Black Hawk faction. The spirit's hollow eyes darkened, and she raised a hand, a gesture that made Clara's skin crawl. The air thickened, and for a split second, the ground beneath them trembled, as if the mountain itself was waking from a long slumber. "The Black Hawk faction," the spirit repeated, her voice a hiss. "You think you can wield the power of the relic? You who are bound by the same blood as those who seek to destroy it? Your people have forgotten the old ways. They have forgotten what it costs to wield this power." Clara's heart pounded, and she glanced at Ashka, who was staring at the spirit, his face grim. "What do you mean?" Clara asked, stepping forward. "You speak as if you know Ashka's people. You speak as though enough." The spirit's voice rose, sharp and filled with the force of 1,000 winds. Clara stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. "We have waited for centuries. You who dare to disturb the balance," the spirit intoned, her voice cold and deadly. "You who bring nothing but destruction in your wake. You think the relic will save you. It will destroy you." Ashka's gaze never wavered, but Clara could see the tension in his posture. His hands, still clutching the relic, were trembling now, and his expression was conflicted. The spirits were not just guardians, they were warning him. Clara's stomach twisted as she realized what they were really saying. "Please," Ashka said, his voice strained, yet resolute. "I only want to protect my people." The spirit's eyes seemed to soften for a brief moment, just a flicker, as though considering his words. But then, the moment passed, and the air around them seemed to grow even colder. Darker. Your people will be your undoing. Warrior, the spirit whispered. You are too late. The balance has already been broken. The relic will choose who is worthy to wield it, and it will not be you. Before Clara could react, the ground beneath them shifted again. The mountain groaned, and the chamber trembled as if something deep within the earth was awakening. The spirits began to move, their forms flickering like shadows in the dim light, their voices rising in a mournful chorus that filled the chamber. Ashka stepped back, his hands still gripping the relic, but the spirits closed in, their forms becoming more solid, more real. Clara felt the weight of their gaze on her again, and it was as if the entire world was pressing down on her, suffocating her. We cannot leave without the relic, Ashka said, his voice low but firm. I must take it back to my people. The spirit who had spoken earlier stepped forward again, her hollow eyes locking onto Ashka's with an intensity that felt like a force in itself. You will not leave here with it, she said. The relic has already chosen its protector. And it is not you. Clara's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? She whispered, her voice shaking. Before she could say another word, the room seemed to darken further, the shadows growing long and cold. The spirits began to swirl around them, their forms twisting and shifting. Ashka's grip on the relic tightened, and Clara could feel the pull of the artifact, its power seeping into the air around them. There was no denying it now. The relic was alive. Its power was more than just a symbol. It was a force, and it was not about to be claimed by anyone who wasn't worthy. The wind howled through the chamber as the spirits closed in around them, their presence overwhelming. Clara felt the power of the relic flood the room, and for the briefest moment, she saw something that made her heart stop. A vision of the future, a flash of chaos, blood, and fire. The Black Hawk faction, destruction, and in the center of it all, the relic glowing like a beacon. Ashka's eyes widened as he looked at Clara, and she could see the fear in his gaze for the first time. We have to go, he said urgently. Now. But as he turned to flee, the spirits reacted angrily. The ground beneath them cracked open, and a pulse of energy shot through the chamber, knocking them both to the ground. Clara's vision blurred, her body trembling from the shock. And then, just as quickly as it had all begun, the chamber fell, silent. The spirits were gone. The relic pulsed in Ashka's hands, its power still radiating in waves. And the walls of the mountains seemed to settle back into their natural stillness. Ashka slowly got to his feet. Still holding the relic, his face pale and drawn, Clara stood beside him, shaking from the encounter, her mind reeling from the visions she had seen, from the power of the relic and the warnings from the spirits. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest. What did they mean? Clara whispered, looking up at him. The relic. It's not just a weapon. It's not meant to be controlled, Ashka said softly, his voice full of regret. It is meant to choose, to reject those who are unworthy. And right now, I don't know if it's chosen me. The wind howled again, but this time, Clara felt the weight of the silence that followed. Whatever was coming, whatever this relic was meant to be, it was more dangerous than either of them had realized. The choice. The wind howled around them, carrying with it an eerie whisper that seemed to come from the very mountain itself. Ashka stood at the center of the chamber, still holding the relic in his hands. But now, Clara saw the change in him. The confidence that had once filled his movements had been replaced with something darker doubt, and fear. He was no longer the man who had so desperately wanted to save his people. He was now someone torn, caught between the weight of an ancient power and the realization that he may not be worthy of it. Clara could feel it tooth tension in the air, thick with the unspeakable weight of what they were standing on. The relic was no longer just a symbol of hope for Ashka's people. It was a judgment, an ancient force that could not be simply claimed. It could only choose, and at that moment, it seemed to be holding its decision close, refusing to reveal its will. Do you feel it? Clara whispered, her voice shaking slightly. The relic, it's alive. Ashka, it's watching us. Ashka didn't respond immediately. His eyes were distant, his fingers trembling as they gripped the box, but he seemed to be caught in some kind of internal battle. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and strained. I knew there would be consequences for taking it, he said, his words barely audible, but I didn't understand what I was truly asking for. The spirits, they warned me. They warned us, but I couldn't turn back. Clara could see the internal struggle within him, the warrior, the protector, and the man who was desperate. to save his people. She wanted to reach out, to tell him that it wasn't too late, but something deep inside her told her that the decision wasn't hers to make. "Why did you come here, Ashka?" she asked, her voice softer now. "What were you hoping to find?" He glanced at her, his eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and regret. "I thought the relic would give me the strength to stop the Black Hawk faction. I thought it could save my people, but now, I don't know. It's not just a weapon. It's something older than that. Something that doesn't bow to anyone." He took a deep breath, and Clara could see him searching for words that were too heavy to speak. The silence between them stretched on, filled with the enormity of the moment. "I thought I could control it," Ashka continued, his voice breaking, "but the relic isn't a tool. It's not meant to be wielded by any one person. It chooses. It always has." Clara swallowed hard, her heart heavy. She could feel the weight of his words sinking into her chest, and for a moment, she was gripped by the same fear. What if Ashka was right? What if the relic had already chosen someone else? What if they were too late? But before she could voice her concerns, the ground beneath them trembled again, a low, ominous rumble that seemed to come from the very heart of the mountain. Clara's breath hitched in her throat. The chamber was shaking, the walls groaning, as though they were alive, responding to something far beyond their understanding. The relic pulsed in Ashka's hands, the energy around it growing stronger, more intense. Clara took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. The relic wasn't just responding to Ashkit, was testing him, and it was no longer clear whether he would pass. "Whatever happens," Ashka said, his voice raw, "I need you to understand. This relic has the power to destroy everything. Not just the Black Hawk faction, but all of it. My people, the land, everything we fought for. If it chooses me, it won't be salvation, it will be the end." The words hung in the air like an ominous shadow. Clara didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to respond. The power in the relic was undeniable, and now, it seemed to be consuming Ashka, pulling him into its depths. His body was trembling with the force of it, the veins in his hands bulging as if the very energy of the mountain was coursing through him. "You have to make the choice," Clara said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "You have to decide if you're willing to sacrifice everything. Your people, yourself. For the power to stop the Black Hawk faction." Ashka looked at her, his gaze torn. "I never wanted this. I never wanted this power, Clara. But I don't have a choice. My people are dying. If the Black Hawk faction gets their hands on this relic, it will be the end of everything." The rumble in the chamber grew louder, and Clara could feel the vibrations in her chest. The spirits had warned them. The relic wasn't a savior. It was an unstoppable force, a judgment that could not be undone. The shadows in the chamber seemed to grow darker, swirling around them. The whispers of the spirits filled the air again, rising to a crescendo, their voices melding into one. "Choose," the spirits intoned. "Choose now. The balance will shift. The power will claim its own. It is not for the unworthy to hold." Ashka's hand trembled, and for a moment, Clara saw the uncertainty in his eyes. The weight of the decision was too much for him to bear. He wasn't just facing the fate of his people, he was facing the fate of the entire world. If he failed, it wouldn't be just the Black Hawk faction who would suffer. The relic would consume them all, unraveling everything. Ashka's breath was ragged, his grip on the relic tightening as the energy around him surged. The chamber was alive with power, the walls crackling with the force of it. Clara could feel the pressure in the air, as if they were standing at the edge of a precipice. And one wrong move would send them plummeting into darkness. "Please," Ashka whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know what to do." Clara's heart ached for him. She could see the weight of the decision in his eyes. He had come this far, fought so hard, but the relic was not a simple thing to wield. It had a will of its own. It was more than just a weapon. It was a judgment, a force that could either save or destroy, and it was asking them to decide. The relic pulsed again, brighter now, as if it had made its own choice, and then, Clara understood. "It's not about the power," she said softly. "It's about who we choose to be. Whether we wield that power for ourselves or for something greater." Ashka's eyes flicked to hers, and for the first time, he looked as though he understood. The relic wasn't a thing to be controlled. It was a test, one that asked not for strength or might, but for the willingness to sacrifice. The winds howled around them again, the energy building to a climax, and Clara realized that the moment of truth had come. Ashka closed his eyes, a single tear slipping down his cheek, and whispered, "I choose." The relic flared one final time, and then, silence. The reckoning for a long moment, there was nothing but silence. The roaring wind stilled, the rumbling of the mountain faded, and even the eerie glow of the relic seemed to dim. The chamber, once filled with an oppressive, overwhelming energy, now felt eerily calm, like a breath held too long. Clara's heartbeat was loud in her ears as she stood frozen. Watching Ashka, he was still standing in the center of the room. The relic clutched tightly in his hands, but now there was something different in his eyes. The uncertainty, the fear, was gone. There was no longer the same desperation in his posture. Instead, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted. But the relief was fleeting. Clara could see what he'd chosen. Ashka had made his decision. Slowly, almost reverently, he lowered the relic. The pulsating light that had been emanating from it had faded to a soft, steady glow, like the beating of a heart. He glanced up at Clara, his face pale, yet calm. For the first time, there was a sense of peace in him, as if he had found what he had been searching for. Not just in the relic, but in himself. "You did it," Clara whispered, almost afraid to believe. Ashka didn't smile. He simply nodded, his voice quiet but firm. "I chose not to wield the power for myself. I chose to let it go." The air seemed to shift. The spirits, who had once loomed ominously, now stood still, silent witnesses to his decision. Clara could sense them, their presence still lingering, but the tension between them had broken. They were no longer adversaries, and Ashka was no longer their challenger. The relic had accepted his choice not because of his strength, but because of his humility. The woman's spirit, the one who had been their most vocal adversary, stepped forward once more. Her hollow eyes, once filled with fury, now held a flicker of something else, understanding. Perhaps, or even respect. "You have chosen wisely, warrior," she said, her voice like wind through a canyon. "The relic does not seek a master. It seeks a heart willing to bear its burden." Ashka's eyes were closed now, his breath steady as he held the relic in his hands. "I don't want to be its master. I only want to protect my people. If that means giving up control, then so be it." The chamber seemed to breathe with him, as if the mountain itself were exhaling in relief. The spirits that had surrounded them began to dissipate, their forms flickering like candlelight in a draught. One by one, they faded into the air, leaving behind an overwhelming silence. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. She didn't know whether to be afraid or relieved, but she knew one thing for sure. Ashka had passed the test. The relic had accepted him not because of his strength or his will to fight, but because he had chosen selflessness. The woman's spirit, now more translucent than before, offered Ashka one last piercing glance. "The path ahead will not be easy, but you have shown yourself worthy. Protect your people with honor, warrior. And remember, this relic is not your weapon, it is your burden." With that, the last of the spirits vanished, their presence dissipating into the stillness like the smoke of an extinguished fire. The mountain fell into an uneasy calm. Ashka stood there for a long time, staring at the relic in his hands. Clara watched him, wondering what was going through his mind. Then, he finally spoke, his voice softer now, almost as if to himself. "I was afraid that I couldn't save them, that I wasn't enough." Clara stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "But you were," she said gently. "You've always been enough. It was never about the power. It was about you, about your heart." Ashka's eyes flicked to hers, a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of gratitude passing between them. For the first time, he seemed truly present, grounded in the moment, and Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her too. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The journey back, the trek out of the mountain, was much quieter than it had been when they entered. The weight of the relic's power no longer pressed down on them, and the air felt different, lighter. The mountain no longer felt like an ancient, threatening force. It felt like a sanctuary. The spirits had not abandoned them. They had simply stepped back, their purpose fulfilled. Ashka walked beside Clara, the relic now secured in a leather pouch at his side. He seemed to have regained some of his strength, though his exhaustion was still visible. They made their way back through the narrow passageways, past the ancient carvings, and out into the cold mountain air. The snow had stopped falling, and the skies were clearer than they had been before. As they reached the base of the mountain, Clara turned to Ashka. "So, what now?" she asked, unsure of what to expect. "You've made your choice. But how do we stop the Black Hawk faction?" Ashka looked down at the relic, a quiet determination settling over his features. The relic has already chosen me, he said, his voice steady. Not for power, but for the strength to protect. I'm not the one who will wield it. But I will lead my people, and together, we'll stop the Black Hawk faction. Clara nodded, her heart swelling with pride. She had seen the transformation in him, from a warrior seeking vengeance to a protector ready to sacrifice for the greater good. He was no longer just a man driven by rage and fear. He was a leader, and you, Ashka asked, his voice a little softer now. What happens to you? Clara thought for a moment, a smile tugging at her lips. I think I'll stick around, if you don't mind. It looks like there's still a fight ahead of us, and I'm not letting you do this alone. Ashka smiled faintly. I'd be a fool to try. Together, they turned toward the horizon. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, Clara felt a sense of hope. They had the relicate's power no longer a force of destruction, but a symbol of what they were willing to protect. As they walked into the setting sun, the mountain behind them seemed to stand, as a silent guardian, a reminder of the sacrifices made and the path that lay ahead. The final stand, the journey back to Ashka's homeland, was fraught with uncertainty. Even though the relic had chosen him, and he had made the difficult decision to set aside its power, their fight was far from over. The Black Hawk faction was relentless. Word of their raid on the sacred mountains had spread, and their thirst for power was only growing. Ashka and Clara had no time to waste. As they neared the edge of the valley that led to Ashka's village, Clara could see the dark plume of smoke rising on the horizon. The unmistakable sign of destruction. Her heart sank. They're here, she said, her voice tight with urgency. Ashka nodded, his face grim, but his steps did not falter. We need to rally the people. We need to be ready. They moved faster now, the terrain growing steeper as they approached the village. Ashka's people, Cheyenne warriors, women, and children, were already preparing for the coming storm. They were a small tribe, but their strength lay in their unity. The warriors stood in formation, their faces painted with the marks of battle, while the women and elders were organizing supplies, readying their families for the fight. Ashka's arrival didn't go unnoticed. The village elder, a woman named Wiea, with silver hair and a piercing gaze, met them at the edge of the camp. Her eyes flicked to the relic hanging at Ashka's side and then to Clara. I see you have returned, Wiea said, her voice calm but strong. And I see you have made your choice. Ashka nodded. I have. The relic has chosen me, but not as a conqueror. It has chosen me to protect my people. And that is what I will do. Wiea didn't speak right away, her eyes lingering on him as if she were weighing his every word. Finally, she spoke. You must understand, Ashka. The Black Hawk faction does not just want power. They want to destroy what remains of our people. This fight will be unlike any other. Ashka looked toward Clara, and for a moment, their eyes met in silent understanding. The relic might not be a weapon in the way they had hoped, but it was still a symbol, a reminder of what they had fought for. And now, it was more important than ever. We need to prepare, Clara said, her voice steady. We need to be smart. If we attack head-on, they'll slaughter us. Wiea's sharp eyes studied Clara for a long moment before she gave a single nod. The child speaks wisely. The Black Hawks do not fight fair. They are not interested in honor, they are driven by bloodlust. Ashka straightened, looking out over his village as if seeing it for the first time with new eyes. Then we'll fight smarter. We'll use the land to our advantage. We know the mountains. They don't. The night before the battle, the warriors of Ashka's tribe gathered around a fire that night. The crackling flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. They spoke in low voices, preparing for the coming battle. Clara and Ashka stood apart from the group, their conversation hushed but intense. We'll need to take out their leaders first, Ashka said, his tone resolute. Without their commanders, the Black Hawk faction will fall into chaos. Clara's eyes darkened as she thought about the man leading the faction, a ruthless warlord named Torak. He was cunning, cruel, and driven by a thirst for power that surpassed even the darkest of ambitions. It wasn't just about territory for him, it was about domination. I'll go after Torak, Clara said, determination hardening her voice. You focus on the rest. We can't let him rally his forces. Ashka shook his head, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. You're not going alone. I can't risk you getting captured, Ashka, she countered. I know his tactics. I'll be able to get close to him. The two of them stared at each other for a long time, the weight of their decisions hanging in the air between them. Finally, Ashka sighed and nodded. But you will not do this alone. I will follow you if only to watch your back. Clara smiled faintly. Then let's make sure this fight ends the way it's meant to. The battle when the dawn broke, the village was ready. Ashka had rallied his people, and they were prepared to fight with everything they had. The warriors formed their lines along the ridges of the valley, the high ground giving them an advantage. They'd learned from the mistakes of past battles. The Black Hawk faction, despite its numbers, didn't know the terrain like the Cheyenne. The ground trembled as the Black Hawk forces arrived, their war drums echoing through the valley. The sight of them, their black banners waving in the wind, their weapons drawn was enough to make anyone's blood run cold. They were here, and they were here to conquer. But Ashka's people were ready. Clara and Ashka led a small group toward the Black Hawk's command post, a tent set up at the rear of their formation. Torak's forces were concentrated on the front, eager to break through the village defenses. The time had come for Ashka to make good on his promise to protect his people and for Clara to confront the monster who had caused so much pain. They moved swiftly through the dense forest that bordered the battlefield, using the cover of the trees to hide their approach. As they neared the command tent, Clara held her breath. Torak's men were everywhere brutes, who lived for battle, who reveled in the chaos they created. But Clara had been trained to blend with the shadows, to strike swiftly and decisively, and Ashka was at her side. His movements silent and fluid, his blade gleaming in the early light. They reached the tent. Clara could hear Torak's voice, low and gravelly, issuing orders to his generals. His men were ready. He was ready. Ashka turned to Clara, his expression hard. We'll strike on my signal. You take the left, I'll take the right. Clara nodded, her grip tightening on her knife. I'll get him. The signal came, a whistle that cut through the air like a hawk's cry. Clara dashed to the left, her movements swift and deadly, while Ashka took the opposite direction. Torak's guards barely had time to react before they were cut down in the swift, silent strike. Clara burst into the command tent, her knife flashing in the dim light. Torak looked up, surprised at the sudden attack, but he didn't flinch. Well, Torak sneered, his cold eyes narrowing. The warrior, who dares to challenge me? You must be desperate. Clara didn't hesitate. She lunged at him, her knife aimed straight for his heart. But Torak was faster than she anticipated. He blocked her strike with ease, his muscles like iron. You've made a grave mistake, woman, he snarled. But Clara was already prepared. She twisted her body, using his own strength against him. In a single, fluid motion, she drove the knife deep into his side, pulling it up to sever the tendons in his arm. Torak roared in pain, staggering backward, but Clara was relentless. She pressed forward, stabbing again, this time into his chest. With a final guttural cry, Torak fell to the ground, his blood staining the earth beneath him. Ashka appeared in the doorway just as she stood over the warlord's body, her breath heavy and her hands stained with his blood. It's done, Clara said, her voice a little breathless but resolute. Ashka surveyed the fallen warlord for a moment before he nodded. The Black Hawk faction will scatter without their leader. Clara sheathed her knife, turning to him. And now we finish this. The aftermath when the last of the Black Hawk warriors had been driven from the valley. Ashka and Clara stood on the edge of the battlefield, looking out over the horizon. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the land they had just fought to protect. We did it, Clara said softly, her voice full of quiet triumph. Ashka stood beside her, the weight of the relic heavy at his side but no longer an oppressive force. We did it together. The relic may not have been a weapon after all, but it gave me the strength to make the right choice. Clara smiled, looking out at the valley, and that was the hardest part. Now we rebuild. Together. The Cheyenne people would never forget the battle they fought, nor the sacrifices made, to secure their future, but with Ashka's leadership, Clara's courage, and the strength of their people, they would rise again. Together, they would protect the sacred mountains, and the future would be theirs to shape.